Welcome to Likable Science on ThinkTech Hawaii. I'm your host, Jay Fidell. Today we'll talk about water. Water, but not everywhere. Its supply and purity is increasingly at issue. Our guest for the show is Professor, I should say, our guest for the show is Dr. Professor Scientist Ethan Allen. Welcome to the show, Ethan.
Nice to be here again, Jay. Always good to talk with you.
Same here. So, ensuring an adequate supply of clean water requires the technology to find it, purify it, protect it, and transport it. Given the increasing demand for clean water and the diminishing supply of it pretty much all over the world, every community and society must plan how to do these things and do them well going forward. So, Ethan, let me start here. Am I right to say that the supply of clean, pure, fresh water around the world is diminishing?
Yes, basically that's true. The water per se is not diminishing. We have the same water now that we had 4 billion years ago when the planet was formed, basically. Uh, but we have managed to foul up a lot of it. Um, a lot of it has now sits in the ocean, or it's got a lot of salt in it. We have dumped chemicals and trash and everything into a bunch more of it. We've made more, some of it completely unusable. And at the same time, yes, our demand is rising at roughly twice as fast as our population is rising. We're all using more water than we used to.
Wow. There's an article in the Times maybe a week or two ago about a farmer and his family in a one man, one family farm in Iraq. And, the Middle East has long been turning into a desert. And his area there in Iraq is turning into a desert, and so he couldn't farm anymore. And
I
you
read that.
look at these, the issues and implications of not having enough water to do this, very small one family farm is pretty tragic because he couldn't stay there anymore. He couldn't grow anything and eat, and he had to leave, and it changed his life and undermined his life something awful. And it's not just him. So we have Iraq and maybe large swatches of the Middle East where people simply can't live. You need water to live. You need water to grow things.
Right.
And this has got to be related to climate change, is it?
Well, sure. 7,000, 10,000 years ago, what we now call the Sahara Desert was a nice savanna area, lots of trees growing, lots of wildlife, lots of shallow lakes, plenty of water. Lots of people lived there. It was a very productive area, and now it isn't. It's a desert. It's a huge desert, right? But and it, the world is a very dynamic place in terms of where water comes and where it goes.
Well, sometimes it goes into a flood and it wrecks a community or communities. Just a few hundred miles to the west, you have Israel. And the famous story about the kibbutzim in Israel is that they made the desert bloom. It was desert when they got there, before, during, or after 1948. And now you look at some of the best agricultural produce in the world, and that's because they found a way to make non-arable land arable. Do you know how they did that?
Certainly, well, they have certainly pumped water from underground aquifers, but more than that, Israel is one of the leaders in desalination. They take water out of the Mediterranean and treat it to get rid of the salt and produce fresh water. That is a rapidly growing technology. More and more places are adopting it. That's beginning to take real hold in Southern California because they simply don't have enough water to deal with all things they need water for, their agriculture, their industry, their populations. They are now setting up systems to completely recycle water. So the water you've flushed down your drains turns around, and few days later, you may be drinking that same water.
Going back to California to the west, yeah, we've seen a number of 60 Minutes segments on this, about how this agricultural bowl, which services the Western United States and Hawaii, by the way, with agricultural products is running out of water. But why is that happening? Why is California losing its water, and why is it having all these issues about how it needs to replenish and expand its water supply, or else it will not be able to do agriculture?
Well, a couple of reasons, Jay. One, there's simply more people there. There's more people moving into California all the time. We're all using water. Lots of the people are urban dwellers. Urban dwellers tend to use more water than rural dwellers for various reasons. Um, the farming there has been very intensive. In the Salinas Valley, the ground level is dropping at around an inch a month. That is a foot per year. The ground is actually sinking because they are pumping so much water so fast out of it. They're drilling wells deeper and deeper and sucking water out. And that when that water is gone, the soil just compacts and settles. And it's largely due to growing water intensive crops that need more and more water.
There's a big lake in California, in Tahoe, I guess. And there's also some big rivers that service this area. And I recall from these segments that the lake was way down. The level of water in the lake was way down. And the level of water in the rivers that service the area was way down. Um, you say that technology can help, but can technology bring those levels up?
Not currently, no. All the whole Colorado River basin is all historic lows, basically. If you look at the photographs now, you see the reservoirs, all of these white rings, basically, large white exposed areas that for years and years were underwater, and now are being exposed as these reservoirs are dropping to historic lows. Some of them down to the point where they're almost going to be unusable. They can't run the dams for hydropower anymore because the water level is too low. Um, it's not just the U.S. This is happening in other parts of the world too. Um, it's a ongoing and unfortunately very underappreciated problem because you know the economists will say, hey, economic security is national security, but you can print money, but you can't print water, right?
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the hydroelectric because the Western USA has a number of dams on rivers, and if the level of the river drops, the hydroelectric drops, and there's no way to rebuild that back, and you've wasted millions and millions, hundreds of millions on building the dams. So you have to find other sources of electricity too. So it really throws things, it throws a curve into our resources that we need to live. We need the electricity, of course, but we also need the water. I want to talk about Flint, Michigan for a minute. I want to talk about contaminants. Um, that because contaminants make water unusable, undrinkable. And Flint, Michigan is an example of an American city that wasn't watching the infrastructure. And I suppose I would guess, but I'd like you to tell me that this is a problem that exists or has existed not only in Flint, Michigan, but in lots of places. Am I right?
Yes, last figures I heard suggest there's probably another 25 or 50 Flint, Michigans in the country, basically cities that are using water that's already marginal. If they mess anything up, their water could go very bad. I mean, Flint, Michigan switched and brought in a different supply of water. Their old equipment could not handle the contaminants in it. They started essentially running a slightly more acidic water through their system. It pulled all lead out of the pipes, and suddenly everyone was ingesting a lot of lead, which is a terribly toxic thing to do, particularly for infants. And yeah, and they are paying and still paying multiple millions of dollars to try to deal with that crisis. And yes, they are only one of quite a number of cities that are going to be doing that in the next decade or two.
How do you do it? You can't use the old pipes; they're going to continue to rust, and the rust will put lead into the water supply. So I don't remember how they fixed it in Flint, or whether they actually fixed it in Flint. But how do you fix that? You got to take the old pipes out or not use them anymore, and you put new pipes. And what kind of material would you want in the new pipes?
Yeah, I mean, certainly you can replace your pipes. You can there are ways actually to line pipes. You can take your old pipe and just stick a smaller pipe within it and line it. Um, you want to use something that's very non-reactive. That's the problem, is that pipes had a lot of lead in them, and that was fine as long as the water stayed at a certain alkalinity, not very acidic. But once they switched to a new supply, and they were warned about this, their engineers told them, they said, do not use this new water without treating it first, because you're going to just start pulling all the lead out of your pipes. And they ignored their engineers, as people so often do, and they are having trouble. Yeah, so the issue is, if you want to keep using your old pipes, you may have to treat your water before you put it into those pipes. You may have to make it very gentle on the pipes, so it doesn't deteriorate them further. Or else, yes, you have to go in and start replacing the pipes with copper pipes, which are very expensive, plastic pipes, which have their own little issues, stainless steel pipes, which are great but pretty expensive. Um, you've got lots of options, but all of them are expensive, and particularly when you start trying to repipe a whole city. I mean, that's massive. You have to take buildings apart, and
Yeah, I wonder about New York. I grew up in New York, and they always said that New York had this huge, like 5 foot, um, pipe system that brought the water from upstate, and it was good, clean, clear drinking water. And New York had some of the best water in the world, because of the system that was designed in the 19th century. But I wonder whether that infrastructure is also deteriorating, and whether at some point they're going to have to replace those pipes too.
yes, I heard a story a while ago. There are, in the New York City system, there are some major valves, so that if necessary, they can shut off big sections of that when they need to repair them or anything. They they don't dare shut those valves anymore, because if they shut them, they may never open them again. The valves may be
Oh,
broken if they're shut. And so now they don't have that control, or they don't know they have that control over the water flow. Yes, lots of big cities are facing that. Cities all around the US and all around the world have also been pumping water out of their ground so fast, the cities are all sinking. Virtually all the major cities in the US are sinking, not just along the coast, not just in lowlands, but everywhere. Denver is sinking everywhere. And we are not doing nearly as badly as some cities in other parts of the world, where they are sinking faster and faster. That, of course, causes infrastructure problems. Buildings start to, the foundations get cracked. Plus, of course, that tends to break pipes, and the pipes start leaking, and then you're losing more water out of your system. And that makes you waste more water. You have to pump more water into the system to keep people's water pressure up, and the water may be getting contaminated from these breaks. And yes, there are a whole slew of problems.
well, one of them might be terrorism. If I wanted to bring a city to its knees, I would cut off the water supply or contaminate the water supply with some kind of toxin. And we hear speculation about that all the time, but I don't think it's happened yet. Problem is, it could happen. The exposure is huge, isn't it?
They actually tried this some years ago. There was a cult in Eastern Oregon that tried essentially to skew local elections by sickening a bunch of people by poisoning the water supply to get people to be ill on election day, so they wouldn't go out and vote and they could get their own candidates elected. It fell apart and didn't particularly work very well. But yes, obviously, you can live 3 days without water. That's about it, basically. You really can't go any further than that. And so, if you have a city that has X number of reservoirs and they get contaminated badly, you're in trouble. In 2018, you might recall, Cape Town, South Africa came within a few days, what they call day zero, when they were going to run out of water. They wouldn't have had any more water to pump through their system. Chennai, India in 2019 hit that point. This was a major industrial city, 9 million people, big automotive manufacturing place. All four of their major reservoirs went dry. The city just basically shut down. They had to bring in trains and trucks for water just for people to drink. They couldn't run their industries. Are not going to be the last time you're going to see this kind of thing at all.
No, but that takes me to Julia Roberts, was it, who played in this very interesting movie around 2000 or so, which involved not just contaminants, but cancerous, carcinogenic contaminants from nearby industry.
Remember
And
the
we have that all over the country. We have killing fields that are nearby these manufacturing sites and chemical plants and the like. And I don't know if we really handled that. I don't know if the judicial system has handled it. I don't know if the various state or federal legislatures have handled it. The problem of carcinogenic water, because right next door to a residential community, you have some kind of chemical plant. I'm so sad about that, but I think it still exists, doesn't it?
it does. In the U.S., it's a relatively minor problem. We have fairly strong environmental regulations that have been fairly well enforced in most places. People have been fined and told to clean up their water output from factories and have been forced to do various things. The place that's very, very, very severe is in China. China's economic miracle, where they raised a billion people out of poverty in a remarkably short time. They did it by essentially on the back of their water. They basically told factory owners, do what you need to do, take the water you need to take. Don't worry about it. Just dump it back in the river. And there are villages now downstream from all these factories that are just locally known as cancer villages because they have huge rates of bladder cancer, stomach cancer, intestinal cancers from people drinking local water. Um, very, very ugly situation there.
Back to climate change. If we're going to have increasing extreme weather, everybody knows that. I don't think they deal with it, but everybody knows it. And so if you have an area that's been pulverized by extreme weather, you're wrecking the water system by definition. And the water system becomes contaminated, not only, with chemical contaminants, but with antigens, microbes of one kind or another. And now that gets to be a whole different kind of contamination because you can't fix it. It's systemic in the area. As wide as the extreme weather was, as wide as the flooding damage was, that's as wide as the problem is. Am I right about that? Is that happening? And what can you do about it?
Yes, unfortunately, you're exactly right. There's a really sort of ironic thing to climate change. The distribution of water uh, in rainfall is changing, and it's not changing in a way you might think. You might think, well, great, we're putting more water up into the air because the world is warming. There's more evaporation from the ocean. We should just be getting more rain everywhere. But it turns out the areas that already get a lot of rain are getting now more rain, and the areas that don't get rain are getting less rain. So the climates are being driven into these more extreme conditions where you have long, long, severe droughts, intermittent, broken by intermittent, very torrential rains, which are not very good, right? Because they wash everything away. Um, the microbes actually can be dealt with, though. There was an amazing technology came out a few years ago when I was working in a water project out in the Pacific Islands. And it's a thing called a Maddie drop. And it's a little cake, a little ceramic cake. And you put it in a dispenser in your home, a 5-gallon or 10-gallon dispenser, and let it sit overnight. And it kills off all the microbes. And then you can use that water for drinking and cleaning and cooking. And you just leave that little cake in your dispenser. Every night you can take water out of your rainwater catchment system, which may have leaves in it, organic debris of all sorts, crud. You put it in your dispenser. The next morning, that water is completely completely microbe free. It kills off viruses, bacteria, fungi, protists. everything. Um, it's infused with silver, and turns out all the little microbes are much more sensitive to silver than we are, and silver is really toxic to them, and so it kills them all off. While being at a level that's perfectly safe for us to still drink. So you can do that on a local level. You can treat your microbial contamination pretty quickly, pretty easily. These things cost $15. Leave them in your dispenser for a year, and you don't worry about it. It's a very simple, beautifully sort of appropriate technology for small rural communities, particularly.
What about the water supply authorities? Why don't they do that? It'd be more than $15. It would be lots more, but they could do exactly the same thing and cover everybody. Nobody would have to spend the $15. Don't we have technology that would apply that same benefit to the whole city?
Well, well, you could, and that assumes that where you put that decontamination in and where people get their water out of are connected by a nice intact water system, and that's increasingly untrue. Much of our water infrastructure is old; it's started to leak. A lot of cities estimate they're losing 15, 20, 30% of their water that they actually catch, they treat, they purify, they send it into the system, and some 10, 20, 30% of it just vanishes, leaks out. Um, a friend of mine was working out in the islands, one of the Pacific Islands, replaced their municipal water system in their capital city, and the water usage in that city went down by 95%. By 95%. Essentially,
Oh,
9.5 out of every 10 gallons of water they were treating and putting into their system weren't making it to people's taps.
oh, how interesting!
Yeah.
Wow. Well, talk about the Pacific Islands. You have sea level rise over there, and the sea level rise is going to rise right into the water system.
Yes.
That's got to be a problem in terms of the availability of clear, clean drinking water. No?
Yes. Particularly on the low islands where there's only a very shallow little, what they call a lens of fresh water that sits in the sand just above the salt water, because fresh water is actually lighter than salt water and will actually float on it if given the right conditions. Um, and yes, so as the sea level rises, that means there's less and less space for that fresh water on top of it, and you get less and less of it. Rainwater catchment becomes more and more important. The patterns of rainfall are changing and are not nearly as reliable and consistent and predictable as they were, which means you have to have larger catchment areas and more catchment capacity in order to ensure that you will have existing fresh water. Um, yes, the small islands, low-lying atolls are in particularly severe danger.
What about these technologies you were talking about? For example, making water out of air. That's pretty clever if it works in volume, and if it doesn't cost too much. And of course, there's desalination. And I recall that San Diego did a large scale desalination plant. This has got to be 10 or 15 or maybe 20 years ago. And they spent 10 billion, $12 billion on that plant. And it was a success, but it was very expensive. And I wonder if desalination is the future, or maybe this technology that takes water out of the air is the future, or maybe both.
Yes, and I think last answer is the case both. Desalinization is becoming a bigger and bigger thing. It's a bigger industry than it ever was before. More cities have looked at the situation and said, we just need to do it. We have no other choice. The ocean is the only place where we can get enough water fast enough to keep us going. And so, yes, I don't care if the plant costs $20 billion or $40 billion. You've got to spend the money and do it. And it's gotten better. The filters in these systems, they largely work on a process called reverse osmosis. These filters that push water, fresh, clean water through the filter, but keep all the contaminants on the other side. Those require a lot of energy. The filters foul up and have to be replaced. But the technologies are getting better. The filters are thinner, so they require less energy, less pressure. They're smoother, so they don't foul up as fast. So those technologies are improving. Um, Recycling of water is still, of course, probably your best, simplest way. It's just don't waste the water. Water that you've used to wash your dishes, but use it to water your garden instead. Don't just throw it down the drain. Some of the small islands actually now, for their sanitation, their toilets and all, pipe in salt water and have a whole separate saltwater system. So they're not bothering to clean up the water first or at the end, because why bother in a sense?
What about public acceptance of water that's been recycled? Because I think a lot of people would say, "What? This came from my toilet. I'm not going to drink it." How
Yes.
confident can we be that those filters don't need replacement? That the system works well enough to, filter out any antigens and microbes?
The phrasing used to be toilet to tap. People don't want to think about toilet to tap. They don't like to think about it. It's always happened. I mean, it's the same water. I mean, the water we drink today has been around for 4 billion years. It's gone through a lot of different systems. It's gone through lots of people, lots of animals, lots of plants, lots of mountains. It's been around, and it's water and it's fine. We drink it. Um, there are places where they are now increasingly using essentially just direct, they pull direct sewage water out and purify it. And it's a multi-step process and it's expensive, but you can now purify it and just put it right back in and start using it as drinking water again. Used to be they would purify it and then dump it out, use it as municipal, water their golf courses and their, municipal grounds and all that, and let it sink into the ground and supposedly purify more. Uh, but now some places are doing this direct cycling, and I think we're going to see more of that. And people are gradually learning to accept it. Systems have been shown to work. They work well as long as you've got people watching and watching the quality, not trying to take shortcuts on it. Buying the right parts, replacing them on the right schedule, monitoring constantly and rigorously. You can do it. You can perfectly clean water out of what was absolutely filthy water.
Bottom line is you need some agency that's going to check it out. You have to have that water tested to be sure for the public to have confidence in it.
Yes.
And there are issues now in this current administration about how much time and energy and expertise we're going to apply to ensuring clean water. And if we terminate agencies or reduce the scale of our water testing, that would be of concern. Am I right to say that we cannot really have confidence in clear drinking water, in clean drinking water, without having some agency look at it on a regular basis? And of course, the alternative to that is people get sick.
Yes. Water needs to be tested, monitored, and that does take people. There's lots of it now. More and more can be done on an automated basis. You can have sampling systems that sample routinely, that run 75 different water tests automatically without really much supervision. But you still got to have people in there who know how to run those systems, are watching that systems are functioning properly. Here in Hawaii, we have a very good system. Our water here is very good. It's monitored very closely. They do run about 75 different tests on anything before it gets into our drinking water. Um, but yes, as you start cutting staff and cutting budgets for these various agencies, sooner or later you're going to start seeing more and more of these mistakes, these problems, these breakdowns, and some of them are going to become very costly.
Yeah, well, some of them people are going to get sick. Others of them, there's going to be contagion and epidemics of one kind or another. That's very troublesome. Let me ask you also about the aquifer. Part of Hawaii's success in water is that we have aquifers. Now, Red Hill did not help the aquifers. But I wonder, how confident can we be that the aquifers are going to last and they're not going to break apart and give us brine?
That's sort of a good news story. It turns out we haven't really had a very good idea of what our mountains here in Hawaii have beneath the surface. there were sort of some assumptions made. Well, they're this kind of rock and that kind of porous rock, and water flows through them, and so and so. But it turns out they're very complex structures. They have sheets of very impermeable rock that hold water. They have sheets of very porous rock that let water through. These are put together in various different ways. Sometimes there are huge basins within mountains that are holding lots and lots and lots of very clean, fresh water. You were mentioning before the show on the Big Island, they went through the standard aquifer where they get their fresh water, figured they'd hit the bottom of it because there was impermeable rock there, drilled through that impermeable rock, and they ran into a second aquifer down below that. Water under pressure, a lot of water, apparently had not been used at all in thousands of years. It's been sitting there basically um, off the east coast of the US, New Jersey, to New York. There is actually under the seafloor, there is essentially an impermeable layer, and beneath that, there is water that it's not completely fresh, but it's a whole lot less saline than salt water, which means it's easy enough to use and clean up. And that was a huge discovery because it means that area where we have a lot of population and a lot of water problems may have a source of water that relatively cheaply they can actually access and alleviate some of their water needs.
Yeah. Well, I'm worried about the global south. I'm worried about that farmer in Iraq. If you don't have water, you can't live there. So you migrate. And if you migrate, you create, social problems, and you also create stability problems and personal security problems. And you have to wonder if the violence that you see, for example, right now in Sudan, is related, at least in part, to the unavailability, the lack of availability of water. I mean, those people are starving, and part of starving is you don't have water. As you said, you can get along 3 days without it. After that, you're in crisis. And so I wonder where we're going on this. I wonder, is the cost of water going to go up? Probably is. Is the availability of water going to be more problematic, especially in the global south? And are we going to do we already have water wars where factions that are unhappy about their water versus the next guy's water is not adequate, and their lives are being threatened, and they do violence to get the water? Is this happening?
Short answer is yes to all those. We have had water wars since ancient times. Some of the very earliest conflicts recorded in 3000 BC were around the Tigris and Euphrates rivers and using that water. Some of the earliest peace treaties, interesting enough, also around water and water usage. People have been fighting over water for a long time. They continue to do so. You recently saw in India and Pakistan, India has threatened to suspend the Indus Water Treaty. If they do that, that amounts to an act of war against Pakistan. By the acts of that treaty, suspending it is an act of war, basically. Fortunately, it looks like this year, at least, there's pretty good rainfall in the areas that are the watersheds for Pakistan, and they're not going to have a water shortage. As long as that works, we may get a little bit of a breather. But yes, there are lots and lots of conflicts. There are any rivers that run between countries. There are always tensions about who can use what water, how can you treat that water, how clean does it have to be when you put it back in the river. All of these kind of factors. Lots of treaties don't deal with a lot of that stuff. They've just sort of said, hey, you use half, I use half, and we don't care anything beyond that. And that's no longer sensible. You need to have data sharing agreements to what happens. All that water in that whole eastern, southeast, and South Asia all comes from essentially the Tibetan Plateau. Glaciers are shrinking there, right? Climate change is happening. Right now, because they're shrinking, there's actually a lot of water flowing in those rivers. Chinese, by the by, have built 87,000 dams to capture some of that water. But in another few decades, those glaciers will have shrunk enough that the water flow will start to decrease. and it's not going to come back at that point. As that water flow starts to decrease, what's going to happen to the people in Pakistan and India and Bangladesh and China, who all rely on that water from those glaciers? It's
Hmm.
not going to be a pretty picture.
Well, before I asked you whether it was necessary to have regulatory agencies, government involved in making sure that water, at least in this country, was pure. But there's a larger issue here. It's the availability of water. We've had water disputes all over the American West. The law of those Western states is replete with statutes and arrangements for sharing water from a given river, Colorado River, the Columbia River. And it's an ongoing issue. It's an ongoing dispute, it's ongoing controversy, and lots of litigation over that, especially when your agricultural area can dry up and your business can go down the tube, so to speak.
Yes.
So I think we have a lot of controversies. The controversies go, as you say, into Indo-Pacific and the Tibetan Plateau, what have you. India has threatened to cut off the water supply for Pakistan, and that is very serious. And remember the Kakhovka Dam that Putin stopped in Ukraine, and it ruined agriculture for miles around, and it affected the agricultural base of a country that depends on agriculture. So these are international problems, and what I'm really asking you at this point in our show is, don't we need an international organization that will make equitable distribution of water and prevent the loss of water, control environmental issues around preserving clean water? And do we have organizations that are effective, international organizations that are effective in that department?
Yes, we certainly need them. We need them here in the US. There are cases right now in Texas where, because of the law, people who own land do not own the water under the land. And so other people from distant counties can go in, drill under that land, and start pulling that water out. And of course, that does not make the landowners above that very happy when that happens, because suddenly they are losing water they have rightfully thought of as theirs, but it is not legally theirs because of water rights laws. So yes, multiply that times 10,000, and you begin to get the sense of the world situation. Watersheds do not respect national boundaries. Um, People do fight over water all the time. Yes, it'd be great if we could have some international water court that had that was authoritative, that people believed in, that people would actually listen to, that had some enforcement power. That would be wonderful to have that. There are some agencies that deal with it. I can't claim they're remarkably effective. They have probably stopped some serious conflicts, which is great. More power to them. But as our population grows, as our need for food grows, as our industries and the need for water grows, AI centers, computers, all those things use huge amounts of water. All this stuff is using more and more and more water, and we're drilling deeper. We have pulled trillions of tons of water out of the surface water of the earth, enough so that we are actually affecting the spin of the earth at this point by having removed enough weight of water from the surface of the earth. That actually literally is affecting the rotation of the earth.
Wow.
We show no signs of slowing that down at all. So, yes, we could certainly use some nice, good, clear, clean regulation governance. It's very hard to get agreement on that. Very hard to get agreement on that.
Well, there's lots more, to discuss on this, and furthermore, it's a dynamic issue, and it will get worse before it gets better. Although I really appreciate your discussion of some of the technologies that could save us. One other technology, by the way, is called safe water systems, which emanated from here in Hawaii. I don't know if you and I have talked about that before. It's a bunch of plumbers that designed a valve and patented a valve, and they put a kind of solar solar system on the roof of a hut in sub-Saharan Africa, and it clarifies the water by heating it up, and it flows through the valve. And the result is a village which has no electricity can actually get clean water. That kind of thing, could be so valuable. Your comments on it?
Yes, there are a variety now of novel technologies for extracting water from air. Because even in deserts, there's a good deal of water in the air. There's some 10%, 20% of the air is actually water. And there are technologies in various different forms and various different stages of development to pull that water out, turn it into liquid water, and store it. Some of these are being developed very rapidly. Some are already widely available commercially. There are things that are essentially dehumidifiers, but set up to maximize the capture of the water. Others are called molecular sieves and metal organic frameworks. And there are other technologies. There are hydrogels now made out of carbohydrates that have a tremendous potential. There are surfaces, or literally the surface properties on a microscopic, nanoscopic scale, are set to cause water droplets to essentially grab onto it, coalesce, start building more water, and then run off. So there are lots and lots and lots of different things. Those give me hope. Those give me hope.
And they could give you more than hope if you were an entrepreneur developing some of these systems. You could make tons of money as water gets more scarce, and clean water, clear water gets more scarce. The people who have these systems are going to get rich. And I suggest to you that in the years to come, it's not just bottling water to give people to walk around in their pockets. It's much more than that. And there'll be lots of money in water. It'll be a tremendous industry, sort of like electrical power. Your thoughts?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, the disposable plastic water bottles are sort of an incredibly stupid solution, quite frankly. It takes more water to make one of those bottles than that bottle can hold. So you've wasted a bunch of water in making it, and then you throw it away. We sell globally 1 million of those plastic bottles every minute. Every minute, every day,
Wow.
1 million of
That's
those
not a
bottles.
solution.
Yeah,
That's not a
that's just
solution.
adding to the plastic pollution, which is a whole separate issue, and we should talk about that sometime because it's getting to be a very exciting. But no, reusing water, conserving water, taking care of water. These are things that people should be deeply concerned about. There are some people who are deeply concerned about them. I hope some of those people will make a lot of money and become very rich. Although I do believe that basic drinking water should be kept in public domain and not privatized. Places they have privatized it generally do not have very happy stories to tell. The price has gone up, the quality has gone down. The rich get all the water they need, and the poor suffer.
Well, we'll have to leave it there, Ethan. I want to tell you, I'm going to be having lunch shortly. And
That's
with my
water.
lunch, I'm going to have a glass of water, and I'm going to think of you. I'm going to think of the future of water, and I'm going to enjoy the luxury of having that glass of water. And I will appreciate every bit of it.
It is a luxury we do not appreciate. I did not appreciate it till I left the mainland U.S. and went to some of these small islands and realized that they don't have a tap where you can just turn it on and get water. I mean, everywhere we know in the U.S., basically, except for Flint, Michigan, you can walk up to any tap, you turn it on, have a glass of water, you don't think twice about it. And that is not the case in a lot of the world.
Okay, we'll leave it there, Ethan. We'll come back and maybe we'll talk about plastics the next time. That's always interesting. Thank you so much to our guest scientist, our chief scientist, Ethan Allen. I'm Jay Fidell, host of Likable Science, which is originally Ethan's show here on ThinkTech. And we've been discussing water, not everywhere. Thanks so much to our viewers for watching. We'll see you again soon for the next one. Aloha. Aloha, Ethan.
Aloha, Jay.